Hey folks, welcome back for Module 4 of the Microsoft MD-102 course. This module is called Examine Application Management. It consists of only three main sections, the first of which is called Execute Mobile Application Management. The second is Deploy and Update Applications. The third and the last is Administer Endpoint Applications. Now, I know you guys probably know it by this point in time, but if you don't, please give the video a like. It does help me and the channel. And then obviously I can go and make more of this kinds of content to help some of you guys out. So the least you can do is just give it a like. And obviously if you want to know when Module 5 comes out for this course or anything else, then, well, subscribe. Or don't. Either way. Alright, let's go have some fun. Alright boys and girls, hope you've enjoyed the intro. So as you can see, the first section we're going to be diving into here is Execute Mobile Application Management. The first topic we're diving into in this section is Mobile Application Management. Now Mobile Application Management is usually known as MAM for short, M-A-M. So something you should probably be aware of regarding MAM is even though the name MAM or the full name, Mobile Application Management, is still used till this day, it is now actually called App Protection Policies. Nobody really calls it MAM anymore. It's actually called App Protection Policies now. So I don't know. I don't know what Microsoft's trying to pull here, but yeah, there you go. That's the new name. So once you understand what this is all used for, you'll see the new name actually kind of makes more sense logically speaking. At least for me it does. I don't know about you guys. Anyway, getting back to the topic, you're probably wondering what is this cool tool called MEM or whatever the new name is, or should I say app protection policies. Struck a blank there for a moment. So Intune Mobile Application Management refers to the suite of Intune management features you can use to publish, push, configure, secure, and monitor, and let's not forget update mobile apps for your users. One of my favorite things about the MAM is that your MAM, Mobile Application Management, protects an organization's data within an application by using Microsoft Intune's app protection policies that of course help protect your company data and, well, in turn also prevents data loss. So this is essentially useful these days with folks not always working from the office anymore, and even more so if you look at the fact that many users are using devices which aren't, well, Windows. Some of these devices are iOS, some of them are Android, and who else knows what else. So these devices that, for example, run Android and iOS, these are only some of the factors that make data security a bit of a concern these days. So this is now obviously where app protection policies come into the picture. If you use MAM without enrollment, a work or even a school related app that contains sensitive data can be managed on almost any device, including personal devices in bring your own device scenario. So that will be a BYOD scenario. I personally love the fact that we are able to prevent data loss or leakage even though the devices might not necessarily be enrolled. Also, even though they might also even though they might not even belong to the company, this is this is just really a big win in my book. This is really going to be a game changer for you guys in the sense of managing your users, managing their devices and their apps, and, well, lastly, let's not forget their data security, guys. So how do we go about implementing this great newfound power, you ask? You implement MAM, once again, should I say Mobile Application Management, by creating app protection policies in Intune. That's how. You will have to go to the Intune platform, folks, and once you're there, you will need to set up app protection policies where you actually specify what it is you want. Once you did that, you will need to apply it to a group in Intune. These groups, for those of you who don't know, they work very much the same as the groups you would find in Active Directory on premises. Hopefully you guys know what I'm talking about. So if any of you guys have ever worked with Active Directory on premises, if you've worked with groups on premises, those groups are very similar to the ones you'd find on Intune. So this is something I did discuss briefly in one of the previous free modules in this course. So you need to apply this to a group in Intune. This can either be a user group, it can be a device group. You need to apply it to a group. This is all stuff we have previously talked about in the other modules in this course. Another term you folks probably would have heard of by now, and it's not to be confused with MAM, is the term MDM. Not MAM, but MDM. In case you don't know, or in case you don't remember, MDM is short for mobile device management. And this manages the device, like the name suggests. So since we currently find ourselves in a situation where employees use mobile devices for both personal and work tasks, we want to make sure they can be productive, but at the same time, we want to prevent data loss because some of these people just, let's not say anything bad about it. It doesn't matter if it's on purpose or accidental, but from time to time on the user side, either way, there's going to be things that's going to happen, and we want to prevent data loss. We also want to protect company data that is accessed from devices that are not managed by us. To do this, we can use Intune app protection policies, independent of any mobile device management solution. Just to remind you guys, mobile device management, that's MDM for short. This independence helps you protect your company's data with or without enrolling devices in a device management solution. By implementing app level policies, you can restrict access to company resources and keep data within purview of your IT department. Something you all need to be aware of is app protection policies are only supported by Android and iOS. When you enroll Windows devices to Intune, you can use Windows Information Protection, which offers similar functionality. So depending on whether you're using Android or iOS or whether you're using Windows, you'll use the one or use the other. Now the one is not necessarily better than the other. It's really going to depend on you or your client's unique needs and requirements on that particular day. So if they've got unique needs that requires them to have Android and iOS, sure, go and use that. There's another way you're going to go and do that. You're going to go use app protection policies. If the client or you need to go and use Windows, then no, you're going to be using Windows Information Protection. Both of them have their own benefits, both of them have their own drawbacks. At the end of the day, you will still be able to manage your devices and their apps. That's probably the most important thing here. How you go about it might just vary slightly depending on the device's operating system. The important benefits of using app protection policies are things like protecting your company's data at the app level, because mobile app management doesn't require device management. You can protect company data on both managed and unmanaged devices. That's pretty important. In fact, you can also do this on unmanaged devices. The management is centered on the user's identity, which removes the requirement for device management. Another benefit, guys, is the end user's productivity isn't affected by all of this, and policies don't apply when using an app in a personal context. Policies are applied only in a work context, which gives us the ability to protect company data without touching personal data. How nifty is that? There are other additional benefits to using an MDM with app protection policies. Once again, that's for iOS and Android. Companies can use app protection policies with and without MDM at the same time. Neat, right? For example, imagine a situation where an employee has a device issued by the company. This can maybe be a phone, for example, and at the same time, they have their own personal device. This can be another phone or a tablet. So, yeah, that's the situation. The company phone is enrolled in MDM and protected by the app protection policies, while the personal device is protected by the app protection policies only. If you use an MDM and if used correctly, it makes sure that the device is protected. You can enforce all kinds of security. This can be things like requiring a PIN to access the device. It can be things like forcing the user to use MFA or to be geographically in a specific location. The list is very long, folks. Anywho, getting back to the main topic here, which was originally MAM, Intune's MAM supports two configurations, folks. The first is Intune's mobile device management and mobile application management combined. With this configuration, devices are enrolled in your company's Intune environment. The second configuration is mobile application management without enrollment. In this configuration, devices are obviously, well, not enrolled, like the name suggests. Using the second configuration, devices are not managed, only applications are. If you want to manage the devices, you need to use, well, obviously the first configuration. This second configuration is typically used in a, well, bring your own device scenario perhaps. If you don't know what that means, that's when your users use, well, their own personally owned devices for the purposes of work. In those situations, we don't normally enroll the devices into the company's Intune environment since the devices don't actually belong to the company to begin with. With that being said, guys, we don't have as much control in those situations. We're not saying that there is no control, we're simply saying there is less control. So ideally, you'll find most companies prefer to issue their users with a device because then it belongs to the company, which means we have a little bit more leeway as to what we can say, what needs to happen, and how it needs to happen. But as soon as people use their own devices, in other words, a BYOD, yeah, the only real benefit there is your company's going to spend less money on buying assets, but at the end of the day, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it, guys. So speaking of considerations, what are they? Well, first of all, folks, Intune's mobile application management protection policies provide comprehensive protection to mobile apps and data without requiring complete device management. Secondly, folks, an app must actually be built to work with mobile application management. Or should I say, MAM? If it's not built to work with MAM, well, I think you can figure out what's going to happen. If you'd like to know more about which apps you can actually go and use, for those of you that's curious, you can actually get an updated list of MAM-enabled apps from the Microsoft website. This is more for the guys that who are actually working on this. It's not for those of you who are actually studying for the exam. So if you're studying for the exam, guys, don't worry about this list I was just talking about. This is more specifically for those of you that's currently working with Intune at this point in time at your office and who would like to know more about which MAM apps are actually, enabled and supported for this kinds of stuff. It's for those guys. So you'll see some of these apps support multi-identity and they will let you or the user use different accounts to access the same apps, while app protection policies apply only when the apps are used in the work context. All in all, these app protection policies protect organization data and prevent loss of sensitive and valuable data. App protection policies allow you to control what capabilities an app has when working with corporate owned data. This includes, guys, preventing the user from copying data from a protected app or to an app that is not protected by an app protection policies. App configuration policies require that the apps support these policies. Just be aware, folks, it might happen from time to time that your third-party apps do not support app configuration policies. If you find yourself in such a pickle of a situation, you can just use the Intune app SDK to add support for app configuration policies to your line of business apps. That's at least, well, one way around that problem. You also have the option of creating a configuration wrapper around an existing app. That brings us to our next topic, preparing line of business apps for app protection policies. Like we just mentioned a moment ago, some apps don't really support certain things. If you happen to find yourself in that sticky situation, you can use the Intune app wrapping tool for line of business apps that do not have built-in protection. You can use the Intune app wrapping tool when your app doesn't have built-in data protection features. You can use it if your app is simple. You can use it if your app is deployed internally. With regards to internal deployment, guys, it doesn't support Apple or Google stores. Just take note of that, folks. I'm going to highlight that differently for you guys. Anyway, you can also use the app wrapping tool when you don't have access to the app source code And then lastly, folks, you can also use it if your app has minimal user authentication experiences. A note I want to make for you guys, which is already on the screen, and I've already said it, the app wrapping tool does not support apps in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. Watch out for that one, folks. They like asking that in the international certification exam. All right, folks, with what we've just said in mind, we're not quite done yet with this topic. We've only spoken about the app wrapper tool. So let me clear up some room here so we can talk about the Intune SDK, which I mentioned earlier. All right, there we go. If you folks don't know this already, you can use the Intune app SDK for developed apps. So when exactly do we use the app SDK, you ask? The Intune app SDK is designed mainly for customers who have apps in the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store and who want to be able to manage the apps with something like Intune. However, any app can actually go and take advantage of integrating the SDK, even guys, line of business apps. So in short, you can use Intune's app SDK for in-house deployed apps, and it can be complex. It can support Apple and Google Store apps. You can also use the Intune's app SDK when your app doesn't have built-in data protection features. Pretty neat, right? You can use it when your app is complex and it contains many experiences. You can use it if your app is deployed on a public app store such as Google Play and Apple's App Store, unlike the previous app wrapper tool we spoke about. You can use it when your app has other SDK integrations. And lastly, you can use it when your app is frequently updated, guys. Alrighty folks, as you can see, the app SDK also have many times and many situations in which you can use it. So depending on you, your company or your client's company's unique requirements and situation, you'll either use the one or the other. So pretty much that's pretty much what the situation is. You're either going to be using the app wrapper tool or you're going to be using the app SDK depending on your situation. Now, with all of that being said, let's move on to implementing mobile application management policies in Intune. So once again, folks, something you might already know by now because I've said it a couple of times in this module already, app protection policies can be applied to apps running on devices that may or may not be managed by Intune. So in other words, it doesn't matter if these devices are enrolled into a company's environment or not. It doesn't matter if these devices belong to the company or the user. Either way, in the end, app protection policies still can be applied here, guys. Something worth mentioning, which some of you might have figured out earlier already due to something I listed, Intune app protection policies are assigned to users. Yep. So yeah, maybe some of you guys figured that out, maybe not. Because Intune app protection policies are targeted to a user's identity, the protection setting for a user typically apply to both enrolled and non-enrolled devices. So it's not based on the device, it's based on the user. Therefore, you can target an Intune app protection policy to either Intune enrolled or unenrolled iOS and Android devices. So it's got nothing to do whether the devices are enrolled or not. Since we're targeting the users here, guys, and not their devices, it doesn't matter if these devices are enrolled or not. Something I also mentioned earlier was Intune app protection policies can also be assigned to iOS and Android devices. If someone has a device like a Windows device, then you'd rather use something like Windows Information Protection, which does very much the same thing in some ways, except, well, it's for Windows. Alright folks, let's talk about managing mobile application management policies in Intune. When it comes to your app policies that you've applied, you can actually monitor app compliance status. Yeah, that's right. Assuming you have privilege, of course, you will be able to monitor and see which apps are not compliant with your policies. Nothing is private anymore these days, guys. The platform provides summary and detailed views of app protection, and some of the information includes things like assigned users with app policies, things like apps with mobile application management policies, top protected apps, users experiencing issues, and also check-in status. you can run either user or app reports. You can really pull a report on just about anything, folks. Well, that finally brings us to the end of the first main section. So now moving on to the second main section in this module, which was deploy and update applications. All right, let's start things off in this section by talking about deploying applications with Intune. So the first thing I want to point out about this is when you deploy applications with Intune, the whole life cycle of apps is actually very similar to that of desktop apps, guys. With that being said, here's a picture for you folks so you can see more or less what I mean by that. So in Intune, the app lifecycle begins when the app is added. It then progresses through additional phases like, well, you can see, which are similar to that of the desktop apps. And then eventually the app gets removed in the end of the day. So it gets added, goes through the life cycle, and eventually ends up being removed. So by understanding these phases, you'll have the details you need to get started with app management in Intune, guys. So looking at the picture, the first step, like I said a moment ago, is to add. You need to identify the apps you want to manage and assign. Once you did that, you add them to Intune. Like we said earlier in this module, you can work with many different app types. The basic procedures are the same. With Intune, you can add apps written in-house, apps from the store, apps that are built in, and apps on the web. Now, looking at the picture again, the second step is to deploy those apps. After you've added the app into Intune, you can then assign it to users and devices that you manage. Intune makes this process obviously very easy, and after the app is deployed, you can monitor the success of the deployment from Intune within the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. Additionally, guys, in some app stores such as Apple and Windows app stores, you can purchase app licenses in bulk for your company, which is really going to make life a little bit easier for you guys. What I like about this concept is Intune can synchronize data with these stores so that you can deploy and track license usage for these types of apps right from the Intune administration console. So if you're the kind of person that has to deal a lot of licenses and a lot of licenses just in general, you're going to want to keep track of that, and it does make it very easy for you to go and do that. Now, step 3, guys, in the picture is configure. As part of the app lifecycle, new versions of apps are regularly going to be released. Intune provides tools to easily update apps that you've deployed to a newer version, should it be needed, of course. Additionally, you can configure extra functionality for some of these apps. Now, looking at step 4 in the picture, protect. Intune gives you many ways to protect data in your apps. Some of those I've actually already mentioned and somewhat kind of explained already, to be honest. Those main methods are things like conditional access and app protection policies. Definitely mentioned app protection policies to you guys earlier. The very last step in the picture is retire. I think this step kind of, well, explains itself, doesn't it? Eventually, the apps that you've deployed will likely become outdated. It's probably going to happen at some point in time, and they will need to be removed. The Intune platform actually makes it very easy for you to go and retire these apps from service. Anyway, folks, let me remove this picture and make some room so we can talk about adding apps in Intune. I know we did mention that in the picture, but let's talk a bit more about it. Alright, so you can add the following app types in Intune, folks. There are quite a few, actually. The first type you can add is store apps. Now, me just saying store apps can mean more than one thing since, well, you get different kinds of app stores. So which stores am I talking about, you ask? Well, folks, I'm talking about all the well-known app stores. That will be things like the Windows Store, the Android Store, so that's probably the Play Store. I think Android calls it the Play Store. The iOS Store, I believe they call that the App Store, if I'm not mistaken. Please correct me in the comment section down below if I'm wrong. So I believe Android calls their store the Play Store. iOS, which is Apple, they call it the App Store. Windows calls theirs the Windows Store, and then obviously you get other stores as well for other people, which is not even mentioned in this course. I mean, if you go look at Huawei, they've got App Gallery and they've got Fedora. For those of you that's curious, not that it matters, but yeah. So other kinds of app types you also get to add in Intune are Office 365 suite apps, web links, built-in apps, line of business apps, and also, of course, good old-fashioned Windows apps. In other words, Windows 32 apps, 32-bit apps, whatever they call those. As you can see, there are a lot of app types you can add, so they really have given us choice, which is pretty cool. Anyway, moving on to our next topic here, folks. Manage or deploy Win32 apps with Intune. That's normal, good old fashioned Windows apps, guys, just in case you don't know. So, for those of you that don't know, these Win32 apps Microsoft is referring to are your traditional Windows apps that run on your device. They're also often called, well, desktop apps, actually. Now, getting back to the topic at hand here, if you find yourself needing to manage and deploy Windows 32 apps, there are some things you should be aware of, some criteria that'll basically need to be met first. In order to deploy Win32 apps, Windows 32 apps, however you want to go and pronounce that, there is some criteria that must be met first. Prerequisites, in other words. I hope I didn't butcher that name. Firstly, devices must be joined to Azure's Active Directory and auto-enrolled. Secondly, guys, there is a size limit per app you want to go and add. Windows applications can't be larger than 8 gigabits per app, unfortunately. There are also some good features worth noting here, mind you. This would be features like both 32-bit and 64-bit apps are actually supported. Pretty cool, right? So that's definitely a win in my books. I don't know about you guys. Dependencies of other apps and install requirements can be defined as well. Alrighty, now that we've talked a bit about the old Win32 apps, let's talk about deploying applications with Microsoft's Configuration Manager. As you can see, we're kind of going through various ways of deploying your various different types of apps at the moment. So, with Microsoft's Configuration Manager, just to remind you folks, in case you forgot from the previous modules, you need to have the agent or client deployed on devices in question to be able to manage the devices and deploy things to them using Configuration Manager. With that being said, instead of using group policy, you can leverage the built-in functionality of Configuration Manager to manage application deployment, guys. This will provide you guys with way more flexibility and control for managing applications. Now, coming at this from a Configuration Manager perspective, application or the app is a widely used term in computing. In Configuration Manager, though, it means something different and specific. You can think of an application like a box. This box contains one or more sets of installation files for a software package. This is known as deployment type. The box also contains instructions on how to deploy the software. Now, when you deploy applications to devices, requirements decide which deployment type Configuration Manager installs on the device. You can do many more things with an application to cater to multiple scenarios. I'm going to list some key elements for you folks that make up the application. The first element is deployment type. The deployment type is the set of contents in the box. An application needs at least one deployment type, as it determines how to install the app. The second element is requirements. Requirements ensure the target endpoint is installed with the most appropriate application. So if the target is running, let's say, Windows 64-bit, the requirements will ensure the target gets the appropriate application. Another element is global conditions. These global conditions can be used alongside requirements to predefine, or should I say specify, custom requirements. For example, an environment key identifier for a test or production domain, guys. We have the element simulated deployment. A simulated deployment evaluates the requirements, detection method, and dependencies for an application and reports out what the expected result would be without actually installing the application. Now, this is a really handy element, wouldn't you say? Anyway, you also get deployment applications. A deployment action specifies whether you want to install or uninstall the application. Not all deployment types support uninstall action though. You get purpose. The deployment purpose specifies whether the deployment app is required or available. If the deployment is required, the client will install based on the schedule. If the deployment is available, it will be available in Software Center. And then you get revisions. When you make changes to an application, a revision is created to enable the application change configuration to be tracked, guys. Then we have detection method. This is something nice we use to, well, discover if a device already has an application installed. If detection method indicates the application is indeed installed, well, then configuration manager will simply not attempt to install it again. As simple as that. Next on the list is dependency. Dependencies define one or more deployment types from another application that the client must install before it installs this deployment type. This is very often helpful in more complex application installations, guys. The second last element on the list is supersedence. I hope I didn't butcher that name. If I did, let me know in the comment section down below. You can use Configuration Manager to upgrade or replace existing applications by using a supersedence relationship. When you supersede an application, you basically specify a new deployment type to replace the deployment type of the superseded application. And then, folks, the last element on the list here is application groups. Starting in version 1906, you can use application groups to deploy a group of applications to a user or device collection. Now, for those of you who don't remember, a collection is the same as a group, except a collection is for, well, the configuration manager side of things. And on Intune, we call it a group. In an Active Directory, we call it a group. But for some funny reason, Microsoft thought it would be funny to go and call it a collection on, well, configuration manager. Previously, before that, you would normally have to go and use something like a task sequence to perform such an action in a complex dependency setup. Alrighty, now that we've talked a bit about deploying applications with Configuration Manager, let's talk a bit about deploying applications with group policy. I mean, I've been mentioning on-premises server and all that so much, we might as well talk about group policies. No, I'm kidding. It really is a part of the course, guys. So with regards to group policy deployment methods, folks, there are some pretty big advantages with it, but at the same time, you'll find there are also some pretty big disadvantages with it. Whether you end up using this group policy method in the end of the day will probably depend on the size of your organization and the unique requirements of your organization or your client's organization. So in case you folks don't know already, Windows Server 2016 and later includes a feature called software installation and maintenance that Active Directory domain services, group policy, and Windows Installer Service use to install, maintain, and remove software from your organization's computers. Neat, right? Alright, so what are some of these great benefits to using group policy for deployment? You might be wondering. Well, let me list some of those main ones for you guys. Group policy, as we already know, is part of ADDS, in other words, Active Directory Domain Services. As most of you already know, Active Directory Domain Services is a role you add on a server which costs you, well, nothing. It's for free. You just need to go and configure it. So basically, it's for the most part almost completely free, this whole setup, guys. Since this is part of your Active Directory, there is no need for a client agent. If you look at other deployment tools like Intune or Configuration Manager, yeah, guys, there you're going to need something. So if you look at something like Intune, you would normally have to go and enroll the device first into the company's Intune environment. If you look at Configuration Manager, you normally need to go and drop a little file, a setup file, an agent, whatever you're going to go and call it, to be able to manage that device. Now, that is not the case when it comes to group policies. Group policies, no, you don't need to go and do that. Now, obviously, it's got a couple of drawbacks, which we'll probably mention in a moment. But one of the benefits here, which is a massive benefit in my book, is the fact that you don't have to go and struggle and go through the inconvenience of enrolling this device or installing something on a device first. Nope, you can just go and use it. On that note, it's easier to use and also relatively fast with deployment. This all sounds great, right? So what are the disadvantages then, you might be wondering? Now, if this tool is so great, there must be a couple of disadvantages. Well, folks, unfortunately, when using group policy, it has minimal features. So yes, you don't have to go and enroll a device or drop a little agent file, but group policy has minimal features. Little to none, in fact, if you compare it to other deployment tools that are available. Also, if you decide to use group policy, it has no reporting of success or failure. What is meant by this is if you were to go and deploy using this method, you'll have absolutely no idea if your deployment was successful or if it failed miserably. You'll have absolutely no idea. So you just cross your fingers and kind of hope for the best. Now, it doesn't happen often that it goes and fails, but there is going to be times where it would fail and you would need to know about that. And the only time you're going to know about that is when it is too late. All in all, guys, I'd say this is actually not a bad deployment method. I've used it quite a few times in my life, and I really haven't had any issues with it. So all in all, not a bad method. It is not suited for all companies, in my opinion. This is more suited for, I don't know, smaller companies probably. Now, as for Windows install service, which was mentioned earlier, this fully automates the software installation and configuration process. And it modifies or repairs an existing application. Huh? How about that? Anyway, let's move on over to the topic of assigning and publishing software. Let's mention some of the differences between assigning an application and publishing an application, since a lot of folks tend to get confused by these two. First of all, you can assign applications only to computers and not publish them. Also, software that has been assigned to a computer will be available to all users who log into that specific computer. Something I also want to mention is installation of an assigned program is not complete until the user actually launches it the first time. Oh, and folks, a user can install a published program through the Programs applet in Control Panel, just in case you didn't know. Now, moving on to a bit of a different topic, which I personally find very interesting, and yet not a lot of companies use it, at least not as many as you would expect. That would be Microsoft Store for Business. So the first thing you folks need to know about this topic is you kind of get two kinds of Microsoft Store. The first one is the normal Microsoft Store, which is for general audience. This one, Microsoft says you can find from Windows 10 onwards, but yeah, I actually disagree with that statement of this. If you go check on Windows 8.1, you would find it actually is there. I don't know, there's a lot of things you guys can believe, so if you go to Microsoft's website, if you go through their official slides and their books and stuff, there's a lot of nonsense they say in there which is completely not true, which you're going to find you're going to be able to disagree with. You'd find, for example, Microsoft says Hyper-V came out on Windows 10. It did not. You can actually find it on Windows 8.1. You just need to go and turn it on as a feature. They say, for example, the Microsoft Store only came out on Windows 10 as well. Nope, not the case. If you go check Windows 8.1, it's right there in the taskbar, guys. Now, folks, don't confuse Windows 8.1 with Windows 8. Those two are not the same. Windows 8 came out first, and then Windows 8.1 came out. Assuming you are indeed running Windows 8.1, Windows 10, or Windows 11, you also usually have to run the correct edition of Windows to have access to this function, from what I've noticed. And I did mention this just a couple of moments ago. Now, looking at the normal Windows Store, which is for the general public access, what do we find on there? Well, honestly, pretty much the same deal as what you would find in the Google Play Store, guys, or the Apple App Store. You can find apps, games, music, movies, TV shows, and also books on there. There is probably a bunch of other things on there too, which I don't even know about. So, yeah, pretty much what you would expect to find on the Google Play Store, the Apple App Store, that's what you can expect to find in the Windows Store. Now, as for the other version of Microsoft Store we get, which is the actual topic here, believe it or not, that is Microsoft Store for Business. It's got a little extra there at the back, for business. This is more for, well, companies, obviously. What you'll find on there is more business-related modern apps and line of business apps. That's not the only thing you'll find on there, though, and also not the only thing you can use the Microsoft Store for Business for. We'll get to all of that in just a moment. I think let me first make some room here so I can list some of the things we can do in the Microsoft Store for Business more clearly for you guys. Alrighty, now that we have some room, let's list some of the benefits of using the business version of Microsoft Store. First benefit I'm going to list for you guys is that it's scalable, free, and familiar. You have to remember that none of this is running on your servers. So scaling up is very quick and easy since it's, well, in the cloud, guys. It's not on your property. You have your own dedicated private store section, the platform. You have your own dedicated private store section on the platform too. That's actually one of my personal favorite benefits about this whole thing, mind you. Unfortunately, to get that benefit, you need to meet some of the requirements first, which is not mentioned on this list yet. We'll get to that later in this module. You get bulk app acquisition for company employees. You get the benefit of app distribution and integration with management tools. You get support for company line of business apps. A handy benefit is the one of app license tracking and management, something we did briefly mention earlier in this module. Usually keeping track of licenses in companies is a mission of note, guys. So if there's anything that can make that easier, it's always going to be a win in my book. Oh, and one last benefit I want to mention here is automatic updating of deployed apps. I mean, it's the cloud after all, so it only makes sense for it to do that for us, right? Now, let's talk about the prerequisites for Microsoft Store for Business. Yes, folks, there are unfortunately prerequisites that will have to be met before you can go and play with this new toy of yours. The first and probably the most obvious prerequisite is that you need to have internet connectivity. I know, it's obvious, but hey, it's mentioned by Microsoft, so don't shoot the messenger. I'm just a trainer delivering this course to you guys, so I have to say what's in the course. Let it not be said I did not cover it, I did mention it. You need internet connectivity. So it might be obvious to you, but there are people that honestly are doing this for the first time that might not know that. So as I mentioned briefly earlier, the Microsoft Store for Business is a cloud service, guys. It's all running and happening somewhere else on Microsoft servers. So with that in mind, for you to access it all and make use of it, you need to have internet access. The second prerequisite is web browser for administration. Please note though, this is however not required for accessing the Microsoft Store for Business apps. The third prerequisite is that Windows Update Service must be running. I'm sure most of you, being in IT, already know why this service needs to be running for this. But in case you don't know already, the service is for downloading and installing the updates to these programs. I mean, it is Microsoft after all, so it only makes sense you're going to be getting your updates for these Microsoft apps via the Windows updates. The fourth prerequisite is you and the users will need an Azure Active Directory account. This is required to sign into the Microsoft Store for Business, guys. If you don't have an Azure Active Directory account to sign in with, how will the store know who you are or from which company you are or all of that kind of stuff? It's not going to know. So that's where your Azure Active Directory account comes into play, to tell the store who you are, from which company you are, where you're from, all that kinds of jazz. So this becomes a bit of a problem in many ways, because if you want to access your company's private section of the Microsoft Store, you won't be able to, unless of course you've got your own account. Each company can have their own dedicated private section on the store where they can actually go and upload or publish their own in-house apps. Only employees in your company can then access this private section, but they need to first prove they are who they claim to be and where they claim to be from. How do you think that's going to happen, guys? The Azure Active Directory accounts, folks. The fifth prerequisite, and the last one on my list here, is Windows devices. Your users who want to access the Windows Store for Business need to be running the Windows operating system. That's unfortunately non-negotiable. It's not accessible from other operating systems other than Windows. You also need to check if you're running the correct edition, mind you. Alrighty, let's talk about implementing Microsoft Store for Business. Firstly, folks, this is actually available for free to organizations, provided that your organization meets the prerequisites like having an Azure Active Directory account. Otherwise, no, it's not going to work. You must also sign up for Microsoft Store for Business. I suppose you call this a prerequisite of sorts now that I think about it. What I mentioned earlier briefly already is that you can manage Microsoft Store for Business in a web browser. You can access Microsoft Store for Business by using a Microsoft Store app or web browser. And then lastly, folks, store permissions are delegated by assigning roles. No surprise there, right? Much like most other things of Microsoft, come to think of it. Well, folks, we have finally reached the end of the second main section of this module. We can now finally move into the third and the last main section, which was administering endpoint applications. Now, in this last section, let's start you guys off with manage apps with Intune. So that being said, it's a nice little picture for you guys to show more or less what I want to show you guys. So first things first, is the app supported? The apps might sometimes be supported, they might not be. As we've been covering pretty deeply in this module, you guys probably would have noticed some apps are supported, sometimes they're not. Sometimes you can only deploy them this way, only that way. There's a lot of things you have to go and consider. Then you need to go and create yourself a user or a device group. This is now assuming you're talking about Intune. So Intune, remember, it uses groups. If you talk about Endpoint Configuration Manager, it uses collections. Essentially the same thing, but yeah, Microsoft thought it would be funny to go and use a complicated name. So you're going to go and create a user or a device group. This is to eventually be used to go and choose whom or what you want to assign these things to. Once you've done that, you're going to go and add the app to Intune, whatever this app might be. When you're done with that, you assign the app to a group, one of those user groups you created or one of those device groups. Then once you've assigned it to a group, you go and configure any policies, if there are any. Usually there are a couple. And then lastly, guys, you of course want to go and monitor the results to see how well it's going. And of course, if there's any issues that you might need to go and address. Now moving on to managing apps on non-enrolled devices. You remember earlier in this module, we spoke about the fact that you do not necessarily have to have devices enrolled into Intune environment to be able to manage them. Especially if we talk about Android, in other words, Google's operating system, and iOS, Apple's operating system. So a managed app is one that Intune controls and control over the distribution and management. So that's what we mean by a managed app. If an app is a managed app, it's because Intune has control over it. So in other words, you've got control over it. Now, an unmanaged app is one that Intune does not control. Pretty obvious, right? I know it is, but hey, it's part of the course. And this is installed directly from public stores like the Play Store of Google or the App Store from Apple. You can assign apps to unenrolled iOS and Android devices. No surprise there. I mean, obviously, you're going to go and choose a group in your Intune environment. This group is going to include devices. It's a device group. And in that device group, you can have either just iOS or just Android or a mix of the two. And in case you're wondering, users use either the company portal app or they go to the Intune company portal website at the address that I've just specified for you guys. If you're wondering where or how you get your hands on this portal app, guys, it's a free app. You can find it in the Play Store. You can find it in the App Store. And I happen to know it on Good Authority. You can also find it in a couple of the other stores, which is not even mentioned in this course. You can manage apps on unenrolled devices using app protection policies, something we covered quite deeply previously in this specific module. We spoke a lot about app protection policies. You remember that we previously said that the name used to be MAM, and now, well, it's called app protection policies. So the name has somewhat changed there, hasn't it? Right, moving on to one of our last topics. It's not quite the last one yet, but we're nearly there, guys. Deploy Microsoft 365 apps with Intune. So when it comes to deploying 365 apps directly from Intune, there's a couple of things to keep in mind here. Windows and Mac operating system is supported. That's good news for you guys that's using Mac and Windows. You can use the Office 365 Suite app type. You can go and do that. There's no need to go and download installation files, although I've seen some folks will still go and do that. And it does support both 32-bit and 64-bit. I don't really know why they keep supporting 32-bit, because we've reached a point in time now where absolutely everybody and everything, or nearly everybody and everything, is using 64-bit. So I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where we can get rid of 32-bit. There's always going to be like one weasel that still wants to go and use it. So yeah. By the way, guys, if you're still watching the video at this point in time, well done. You've probably reached like the 1 hour mark by now. If you guys don't mind, remember to give the video a like. I do appreciate it. And this week, I've got another fun treat for you guys. So sometimes I give you guys a secret word. Sometimes it's a secret sentence. So this time around, let's keep it a little bit interesting. Let's make it more interesting. You can use any phrase or any sentence from the How I Met Your Mother TV series. If anyone has ever watched that TV series, maybe use a fun phrase or a fun sentence, a funny sentence. Keep it PG, guys. No swearing words in the comment section. The YouTube police is going to be on my case, and they're going to be on your case if you do that. So let's not do that. So keep it PG. But something funny, something fun, a random phrase from the How I Met Your Mother TV series, you're allowed to go and put that in the comment section. And for all you know, maybe someone's watched the same episode and they will continue on your sentence. You can actually continue the conversation there just for funs and gags. Anyway, so that's for those that wants to do it. Alternatively, you can just post your questions down in the comment section down below. You guys are probably well aware at this point in time that in the video description you'll find the usual timestamps to make your life a little bit easier when it comes to finding certain topics in this module. What you will also find in the video description, literally like way at the bottom of the video description, is a Discord server. So for those of you that would like to join an IT community of like-minded people, people that are studying courses like this course, and people that have done this course and that have knowledge of the course, feel free to check out that community. It's a completely free server on Discord. I myself am also in that server. So if you've got any questions, you can post them there. Either myself or someone will answer your question. And maybe someone else has got a question that you know the answer to. Either way, it's a fun community. Come join us, guys. All right, moving on to the last topic of this module. Wow, I can't believe I'm finally saying that. Additional Microsoft 365 apps deployment tools. So what I'm about to list for you guys is 4 of them. Is different ways or extra ways or methods for you to go about deploying these Microsoft 365 apps. The first one is System Center Configuration Manager, which can be used to prepare and deploy to devices. That's actually a very powerful tool. I wouldn't say it's my favorite. In a sense of functionality and flexibility, it is really, really cool and very powerful. Probably the most powerful out of the lot that I'm going to mention for you guys. But it is somewhat user friendly. So unless you've got someone to guide you or you've got some level of experience, it can be a little bit overwhelming in the beginning. Then we've got the Office Deployment Tool, which is fairly popular amongst people. Even if you don't know what it is, you can figure it out very quickly. This is used to download and prepare installation files. It speaks for itself, doesn't it? We've got the Office Customization Tool. So this, for those of you who don't know, is a web-based tool used to configure Office 365 Pro Plus installations. You can go and choose how, where, what, when, what needs to be included, that kinds of jazz. And then the last one, which might very well be the most common, most well-known one, and probably the most widely used one here, Office 365 Portal. Now that might be a bit vague, so what I mean by that is the ability for users to go to the 365 portal, this will be specifically the user portal, guys, and being able to install Office directly or install the apps directly onto the devices. Now, what I don't mention here, Microsoft, and I'll just mention it for you guys as an extra, it is subject to your privilege, and even more so, subject to your license. Not all licenses includes all apps. It also depends on what your administrator has allowed you access to. So even though something might be included in your license, that doesn't mean you've got it. It could be a matter of your administrator has decided, you know what, you don't need this, or you should not have access to this, and they could, at their discretion, go and deny you access if need be. Alright folks, I hope you've enjoyed this 4th module of the Microsoft MD-102. I really hope you guys have learned something, especially for those of you that's studying for the certification exam. I really do my best to try and prepare you guys for the exam. If you've enjoyed this, if you feel like you've learned something, do me a favor, give the video a like. Maybe subscribe, that's up to you guys. Before you disappear on me, the usual thank you to the Patreon sponsors, the PayPal sponsors, and quite frankly, everybody else. So this includes those of you clicking on the thanks button. It includes those of you that's just been doing coffee donations. Yep, you can find all of that in the video description. So here's a screen of all the Patreon sponsors. Guys, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. A screen of the PayPal sponsors. And then obviously, just once again, thanks to those of you clicking on the thanks button and buying me coffee and milkshakes. And just a reminder, guys, there is a Discord server which you can find in the video description down below, should you be interested. Alrighty, folks, I will talk to you guys again in Module 5 of the Microsoft MD-102.